Gentlemen, what is going on today? My name is Ryan Mickler. I'm your host. I'm also the founder of the Order of Man podcast and movement. I am glad you're tuning in, whether it's for the first time or the 100th or maybe even 1,000, because we are quickly approaching that 1,000 podcast mark, which I am excited about. We're going to try to do something special, but I just wanted to let you know first and foremost that I appreciate you guys being here, tuning in. But the most important thing I appreciate about you is that you're actually applying the information, because that's what we're all about. How do we bridge this gap between what we as men know we should be doing and what we're actually doing? And one of the things I'm going to talk with you about today is that very topic, specifically as it relates to homeschooling. This is always a very charged and polarized topic. A lot of you guys tuning in are fathers or aspiring fathers or practicing fathers to be. We'll say it that way. And more homeschool is becoming a viable option, and more it seems to me that public schooling, government schooling, is becoming less viable for a lot of you. So my family and I, my wife and I, made the decision 3 years ago. This is 1 year pre-COVID, to homeschool our kids. And anytime I talk about it, man, we get such a wide spectrum of concerns or accolades and anywhere in between. So what I wanted to do today is, if we're going to have the conversation, and we should, I'm not suggesting that all of us need to believe the exact same around the education of our children. I think I've got some good ideas. I think homeschooling has proven for us and for millions of other families to be very effective when it comes to raising and educating your children. But if we're going to have those discussions, we need to do it from an established baseline. So we're gonna bust some myths today. Before I get into that, just want to mention that very quickly, we have an event coming up the end of May. So it's May 28th. It's a one-day father-son experience called Squire Program. Bedros Keuilian and his team from California are coming out. They're going to spend the time here, and we're going to put these men and their sons through the ringer, physically, mentally, emotionally. We're going to challenge you. We're going to challenge your boys. And we're going to help you usher your young man into manhood through tests, through challenges, through hardship, through experience, through learning. And this is all going to happen here at my property in Maine on May 28th. If you're interested, get signed up. We have a few spots left, and you can do that at squireprogram.com/Ryan, squireprogram.com/Ryan. All right. And also, by the way, with this event, this is actually one of the cool things, is that these types of experiences are the types of experiences that count towards schooling. Now, it's not traditional, right? It's not what you would traditionally think of when it comes to schooling, but it is schooling nonetheless. So let me just take a couple of minutes and explain our story. I don't want to take a long time, because I've explained it in the past, and I do want to get to these myths, so those of you who are considering homeschooling can understand the reality of it. My wife and I, when we moved to Maine, we were going to have our children enrolled in the school district, and where our property lies, they were going to be in a different school district. And we'd kind of tossed around the idea of having them schooled and educated at home. And it just made sense when we moved out here to do it like that. So we made that decision. This is about a year before COVID. And, looking back with school restrictions and schools and classrooms closing, it actually made a lot of sense. And we're glad that we got out ahead of the curve because it was coming down the pike anyways. So we were fortunate that we did that. Weren't really sure if this was the best solution, but looking into it now, absolutely, it was the best decision for us. I think there's a real challenge in government schooling right now, specifically with the rise and infiltration of sexual indoctrination. Now, I know people don't like to hear this. I know a lot of people might think, well, that's not happening. No, clearly it's happening. All right. And it's happening at an increasingly younger age. All right. When you're talking about transgenderism and introducing gender, and we see and hear from so many school teachers who are introducing our children to, their sexual preferences and their lifestyle and the LGBTQIA or whatever agenda. Like, this is happening. And I'm not interested in that happening for my children. So I'm glad that even 3 years ago, we got out ahead of this curve, because it's happening that quickly in a matter of 3 years. Now, some of you guys might say, well, when I was a kid, yeah, well, that was probably 20 years ago. For me, it was a quarter of a century ago. That's when I was going through school, and school was different then. So I don't want my children to be taught these sexual, perverted, frankly, ideologies from people I don't know, people that I don't trust, and people I don't agree with. Now, if you want to talk math or writing or English and these kind of things with my kids, that's your role. But your role isn't to tell. I heard one where a school teacher proudly proclaimed on some TikTok video that instead of doing social studies or sciences or whatever he was doing, he started explaining to the kids in his classroom about gender ideology. And he was so proud. Hey, we're going to do math, but instead they were asking questions. And so I explained, of course they're asking questions because they're curious. They've never seen it before. So they're wondering, what in the world is this? So of course they're asking questions, but it isn't your right. And it's not your responsibility to deviate from what we as parents who have our children enrolled in these schools dictate that you should be doing through our elected officials. And speaking of elected officials, namely school board members, you all better be aware because you're on notice. And you parents better be aware of what's being taught in these schools. And you better hold these elected officials, these school board members accountable because they think they own your children. They think that your children are theirs and they're not. Oh, Ryan, that's inflammatory. That's hyperbole. No, it isn't. All right. Listen to what's going on around the country. Listen to these school board meetings. Listen, look at the books that are being recommended to your children. Look around in your school, like look at the teachers. You can see pretty quickly what it is they're doing and what they're all about. And you better get involved at a minimum. So we made this decision 3 years ago to pull our kids out of government schooling and decided instead to take that upon ourselves. And it's been an uphill battle in a lot of ways. And it's been very advantageous and beneficial for my wife and myself, and also for our children. But whenever I bring this up, there's usually 3 or 4 main sticking points for people. And the sticking points that I've seen flat out are incorrect. So let's get on a level playing field here. And if there's other reasons that you think maybe homeschool is not the best option, then that's fine. But I do want to make myself very clear when I'm talking about this first and foremost. I'm not talking about every kid who doesn't have the opportunity. I'm not talking about the children who potentially are in poverty or their parents aren't around. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. Okay. There are some reasons for public school, a public schooling option, but that's not your children, right? I'm talking about your children. I'm talking about the responsibility you have as their parent. So let's not shift the conversation to something I'm not talking about. I'm talking about you and your children. And if you decide, hey, we don't want to do that, by all means, do what you got to do. Do what you think is best. I'm telling you, I don't think it is. That's my opinion. None of this truth or my truth stuff. It's my opinion. That's not best. I think it's dangerous. I think it's potentially destructive. And I think it's a really good way for you to lose your children, at least their minds and their souls. And I'm not interested in doing that for my kids. If you see it differently, by all means. But let's keep the argument on point and work from a level playing field. So let's address these. I have 4 today I wanted to talk with you about. Okay. Number 1, these aren't in any order, but the one that I get quite often is that you as a parent aren't qualified to teach, that you're not qualified to teach your children because you don't have a degree, formal education in schooling or these things. Guys, that's the furthest thing from the truth. You as a father of your children, your wife as the mother of those children are eminently qualified to be able to teach your kids what they need to know. You went through school, you have a high school degree, you probably have some post-secondary education, whether that's through a university or a trade school, or even the experience that you have in life. I didn't go to trade school. I didn't go to a university. I went to half a semester of college, dropped out, but I've got 20 plus years of entrepreneurial experience. And you're going to say that a person who has that experience is not qualified to teach his kids? Now, let me also say this, is that I think there's a lot of great school teachers out there. I think there's a lot of teachers who want to do best for their kids, who care deeply about the children they're serving. And they're doing this with noble intent, with righteous intent. They're trying to do right. But you school teachers, based on the conversations I've had with quite a few of you, are so burdened and bogged down with not teaching, the administration aspect of it, all the paperwork and all the assignments and all the red tape and all the reports and everything else that you get bogged down with, so much so that it actually hinders your ability to teach our children. The other thing is, just because a public school teacher, and I'm not necessarily talking about college right now, I'm talking about K through 12, just because a public school teacher has a degree in education doesn't mean they have advanced knowledge of some of these other areas in which they're teaching your children. For example, math. Now, unless they have a secondary degree in mathematics or engineering or one of these things, it might not be that they're coming to the table with any more experience than you, really just how to navigate the landscape, which bogs a lot of these well-intentioned school teachers down, and B, interpersonal communication, how to manage a class of 30 12-year-olds. So there is some benefit there, because if you've got 30 12-year-olds, you need to be able to know how to manage that class. You have to have some sort of behavioral psychology knowledge. They're not psychologists, but behavioral psychology knowledge with how to keep these students and these kids on track and how to keep them learning. So I'll give you that. But I don't have 30 kids in my classroom. We have 4. And those 4 children, I know intimately. They're my children. And I know what they're good at. And I know what they're not good at. I can look at them and I can see when they struggle that they're struggling. I can look at them and watch and see when they get things, and maybe we can double down on that. So I have unique advantages that a school teacher, bless their hearts, just doesn't have. I couldn't do that if I had 30 kids. Okay, not to mention the concept of no child left behind. Right? So you might have a student in your class who doesn't get it for whatever reason. Maybe there's a learning disability. Maybe it could be an IQ issue. It could be a behavioral issue. Maybe no support at home, which is actually quite common, obviously, which is why a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of parents do drop their kids off at school because it's like, cool, they're out of my hair now, right? It's not everybody, but that's certainly an issue. And so these school teachers are burdened. And I don't know if burdens are, I'm trying to be empathetic to this. These school teachers are tasked, we'll say that. They're tasked with having to make sure that little Timmy, who can't keep up for whatever reason, doesn't get left behind. But what happens to little Billy and little Susie who are excelling, who get it, who get frustrated and bored and start getting into trouble because they're not being challenged in a meaningful and significant way? We know this is the case. We know it. And so we say, well, no child left behind. Well, what about those kids out front who aren't getting personalized attention, who aren't having a catered experience to them, who aren't being challenged and pushed in meaningful and significant ways? The other beautiful thing we can do as a homeschooling family is that I can build a curriculum based on what each of my 4 children need. I've explained this in the past. My daughter, she's dyslexic. We didn't know that until about 3 years ago when we started trying to teach her. And I could see that she was reading and I'm like, oh, she's doing a great job. But then I watched her eyes, and what she was actually doing is she had memorized all the words because my wife and I had read those books to her. She'd memorized the words and then associated them with the pictures. So I'd turn open a page and she would say the words verbatim. And I'm like, oh, cool, she's getting it. But then I would watch her eyes and she's actually just looking at the picture. And it's frankly been a real struggle. Well, I think in the public school system, she probably would have been left behind because she's intelligent enough to fake her way through it. She was trying to do that with us. And she would have got lost in the shuffle and lost in the mix and not really got what she needed. A lot of you, now I know this now, I didn't. A lot of you listening are probably dyslexic. It's actually fairly common. I didn't know that. So my wife and I had to try different ways of introducing words and letters and sounds. And even to this day, 3 years later, there's still some struggles and we have to work through that. But she's not going to get lost in the shuffle. She's going to get exactly what she needs. And I'm going to take out that one little bit of information that doesn't work for her. And I'm going to input it something else in that's going to be a little more suited to her. I mean, there's so many resources online. We use a program called The Good and the Beautiful. I don't particularly like that name, but it is a good curriculum. And that's the curriculum we use as our baseline curriculum. I say baseline because there's other ancillary curriculums that we get or explore or purchase or implement based on what our children need, based on what they're interested in, based on what they're struggling with. A school teacher can't do that. I'm not saying they don't want to. I think they do. I think they want the children to succeed, but they're in an environment that won't allow them to succeed. The analogy I would use is if you have an apple tree in your backyard. Well, if the tree goes bad, the fruit's going to go bad. Okay. And it isn't really the fault of the limb of the tree. It really isn't the fault of the fruit, the apple of the tree, that the tree went bad. The tree's bad. And naturally and inevitably, it will begin to poison the limbs, the teachers. And naturally, inevitably, those poison limbs, the teachers, will then have its effect on the students or the apples. Like, you cannot produce good fruit from a rotten tree. And so I'm not saying the teachers are rotten. I'm saying the system is rotten. It's eroding. It's crumbling. It's being rooted out. It's being changed. It's being manipulated. So we, as parents, my wife and I, have a system that works because we test it. And if something doesn't work correctly, we put something else in there. And we can do that. We can adapt because A, we know our children better than any school teacher can. And B, we have access to the resources to be able to change as we need to change and implement what needs to be implemented in our young children's lives for the betterment of them and their long-term success. A school teacher's classroom just is not that mobile. Can't do it, even if you wanted to. And again, I think a lot of school teachers would, but you can't because you're hamstringed by this curriculum that, frankly, you probably didn't have that much say in. So please, let's get over the notion that you are not qualified. Also, if you feel like maybe you're not the best in math, well, maybe your spouse is. I mean, that's the situation with my wife and I. She's very good at the other things. And then when it comes to math, she's like, Dad, you step in, you teach the kids on what they're struggling with. And I get it. That, like, math resonates for me. So I can step in and I can help them with that. The other thing you could do is you could hire a tutor, right? That's an option. That tutor comes into your home, or you take your child to that tutor, or you do it at the library or whatever. And then you have customized, catered information for your kid to learn in a lot more efficient and effective way. So that's number one, is that you're not qualified. You are qualified. Okay, you're just as, if not more so. So please don't think that just because you don't have that teaching certificate that you can't teach your kids. You absolutely can. You can probably do it better. All right, number two, this is a big one. Well, the kids aren't socialized. Kids won't get socialization. That to me is such a strange concept, because I know rational people who make this argument. Like, these are rational, intelligent people. And like, if your kid doesn't go to school, they won't be socialized. As if public schooling is the only socialization opportunity in the world. Far from it. My kids are so socialized. Right? They could sit down at a table with adults and they could hold that table. They can tell jokes and stories and laugh and take a joke and give a joke and all the things that they would need to do in their life as they grow up. They can do that better, I think, than a lot of what you see in the school district. I'm not saying exclusively, but I'm not saying that being socialized at school is the pinnacle of your social evolution as a child. Far from it. Far from it. Because what are they learning? Well, we already talked about what they're learning from their school teachers. So I don't want them socialized to that. I don't want them to think that's like normalized behavior. But also, what are they learning from their friends? About drugs and addiction and pornography and sex and gender and transgenderism and all these other things that other kids are learning. Am I supposed to say that I want them to be socialized to that? Yeah, I don't want that for my children. And we're going to get into exposed to new ideas here in a minute. So I don't want to cross over to that, because we are going to talk about that. But my kids are very socialized. They're part of a CrossFit class that they go to 3 to 5 days a week. They go to the gym. My two oldest boys go to a gym. They have a coach who trains them with strength training, and they work with other boys there They're all very involved in sports. My daughter has a dance class that she goes to every week. We've got a couple of neighbors right down the road that have 5 children that are all right about the same age as our children. They homeschool too. So their kids come over and play. My kids go over there and play, and they learn things about farming and hard work, things that you wouldn't necessarily learn at school. And then the other thing we do is we as a business, I host big events here on my property, like on my property. My house has like a revolving door built into it of strong, bold, successful men. So when my kid, and I'll never forget this moment, a lot of you guys know my friend Brandon Lilly, big, intimidating person. So big guy, he's strong, he's all tatted up. He used to have a beard. I think he shaved it off. Shame on you for that, Brandon. But other than that, we're all good. He's a big and intimidating, imposing figure. And I'll never forget, I had him over for an event. This was, I think, 2 years ago. And he walked in, and before I even said anything, my son was so excited to meet Brandon Lilly, my oldest son. So he must have been 11 or 12 at the time. He walks right up to Brandon. He extends his hand. He looks Brandon right in the eyes, up, right in the eyes, shakes his hand and says, "Hi, I'm Brecken. You must be Brandon. I've been looking forward to meeting you." They're socialized. They get it because we take the time to ensure. Now, that is one of the challenges. Let's be honest. Is like, I have to go out of my way, as does my wife, to put them in environments with other children. And it isn't always easy. It's not always convenient. There's other things I wish I could be doing, but their socialization is an important thing to me. This has really changed relative to when you and I were students, and the homeschool kids were weirdos. Let's just be real about that. They were weird, right? But the socialization issue is just not as big a deal, especially with the millions and millions of people who have decided to homeschool their kids. Now there's co-ops. There's learning groups. One thing that we've done in the past is travel down to Boston with a group. We take the train down to Boston and we go to the museums with other homeschoolers. Guys, the opportunities are there. I promise you, they're there. They're available. They're out there. A little more effort, sure. But now you get to choose who they're going to be socialized with and by. And that's an important distinction. So let's talk about the next myth, because we've kind of crossed over into this, is this idea that if you don't send your kids to school, then they're not exposed to new ideas. There's a lot wrong with this myth. Okay, the first problem with this myth is that there's some ideas I don't want them to be exposed to at an early age because they're literally incapable of discerning fact from fiction. They're ignorant. They're literally incapable of doing that. So when you have a school teacher that starts teaching them all this gender ideology nonsense, and you're like, well, you know, my kids, I just want them to be exposed to new ideas. They can't make decisions for themselves. This is why we have consent laws. This is why we should have laws in place, and there are some, but even more so with regards to protecting our children from mutilating their bodies because they've been introduced to the concept that maybe the boy is a girl and the girl is a boy. Okay, at the age of 13, like, you're just figuring out how to play with your dinghy, right? Like, and then you're going to have a parent or a teacher start suggesting to you that, oh, maybe this child needs puberty blockers and maybe we ought to mutilate their body so that we can take that penis and turn it into a vagina. And or with young ladies is take their breasts off so they're more flat chested so they look like a man, or introduce testosterone and they start growing facial hair. A lot of this stuff is unreversible. You start mutilating the body at a young age, like, kids can't make that decision for themselves. They don't even know the consequence of it because they don't get it. We don't expect them to. It's the same reason why, and unfortunately, I think this might change as well, is that a child cannot consent to a sexual or intimate relationship with an adult. They're incapable of doing it. Okay, they don't know what's wrong. For young boys and young men, the front of the brain doesn't even fully develop until the low to mid 20s, like 23 to 25 years old. Your brain's not even fully developed. Okay, this is why we have consent laws. This is why we have laws in place protecting children from being preyed upon, because kids can't make those decisions themselves. And so I I don't want my children exposed to some ideas from somebody I don't know or don't trust or don't agree with when my children are incapable of discerning right and wrong or fact from truth, or excuse me, fact from fiction. Now, 25-year-old kid that's going to college and they're exposed to different ideas and different ways of doing things, and they can articulate a little better, they can defend themselves, they can stand up for themselves, they can question. Okay, that's another story. But we're talking about children here. And so that's one of the problems with that myth. The other problem is just because they're not going to school doesn't mean they're not getting exposed to new ideas. My kids and I listen to podcasts, some of which I agree and some of which I don't. But guess what? When there's things I don't agree with or things they have questions about, where do they turn? To me. And then I explain to them what they're hearing and what's being taught and what that person is saying. And you might say, well, Ryan, you're talking about indoctrination in the school district. Aren't you doing the same thing? Yes. Yes, 100%. I am indoctrinating my children. The difference is it's my right and moral responsibility to do it. Because indoctrination is taking a belief system and then teaching that belief system to somebody else. That's indoctrination. Teaching them a doctrine. So that's what I'm doing. And that's what every parent is doing. And that's what school districts are doing. The difference is I have the right and the responsibility to do it. School teachers, school administration, and the school district does not have the right to indoctrinate our children into their, what I believe are misguided and dangerous ideologies. That's my responsibility to help them filter that information. So it isn't that they're not exposed to new ideas. We talk about new ideas all the time. I talk about things I'm upset about. I talk about things I agree with. I talk about things that I don't agree with. We have dinner together. We break bread. We have breakfast together. We have morning meetings. We're having discussions. My kids are like, hey, I want to go shoot. And I'm out there teaching them firearm safety rules. We have other men come into the house for events. I present to these men. So my children hear me. They can hear this podcast. Like, they're getting exposed to new ideas. Again, school doesn't have the corner on the market with new ideas. We believe that because it used to be that schooling was an institution where you could go and you could be introduced to new concepts and ideas in a civil manner. And then you could hash them out and separate the wheat from the chaff, right? You could decide what was good and what was bad. And now they just get one side of the equation. So we got to get over the myth that our children are not getting new information in other places, and B, that it's the school's right to even do that. It's not. It's your right, and it's your responsibility. And I guess the third point of that, and I alluded to this earlier, is believing that your kids can even combat against dangerous ideology. You know how much easier it would be, and this is like, excuse me, this is going to sound evil. And I'm not trying to compare it to this. I'm just giving you an analogy here. But how much easier it would be to get a child to commit suicide than it would be to get an adult to do that. Like a functioning adult versus a functioning child. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality. They're impressionable. They don't understand. They don't get it. They don't know how to separate right from wrong. And so if we're just exposing them to new ideas and not controlled environments, then the new idea isn't virtuous. The introduction to the new idea isn't virtuous. It's only virtuous in as much as somebody can make a choice. Right? Like if I'm in jail, here's another analogy. If I'm in jail and you're like, hey, we're going to let Ryan out. He hasn't stolen anything, for 12 months. He had an 18-month sentence, but he was in his jail cell and he didn't steal anything for 12 months. Right. But that doesn't make me virtuous or make a good behavior. I just didn't have access to it. Now, if I had access to it and I decided not to, then that's virtuous, right? So our kids, in order for them to make good decisions, it actually has to be a decision. They consciously make a decision, but they can't do that when they're children because their brains aren't fully developed. All right. I think you guys get the point. And the last one I wanted to address, this one's very, very important. And all the objections I get fall into these 3 or 4 categories. But the last one is this, that, Ryan, that's great for you. We would love to do that, but we can't. And usually the reason is time constraints or money. And I understand. I do. I get it. I've been fortunate. My wife has been at home, a stay-at-home mom, a housewife, a homemaker since we started having kids. And we are fortunate. We are blessed that we're able to do that. I'm so grateful. I thank God every day I'm able to do that. And I know that not everybody can do that currently. But there's ways to make this work, guys. There's ways to make this work. Get a promotion, get a second job, figure out how to start a business, develop a new marketable skill, invest, get out of debt, sell some things that you don't need anymore. You can't say that you want to do it and it's so important to you in one breath, and the next breath say, but I'm not willing to do what would be required. And that really is what you're saying. Now you paint it as something different. You justify, you rationalize, oh, we need to, like, the economy is just, it's just not possible anymore. Okay, but that's your painting of the environment. It isn't truth with a capital T. So why are you telling me how badly you want to do this on one hand, and on the other, you're like, no, but I can't. No, it's not that you can't. It's that you won't. It's that you won't even work towards it. Because right now it might not be in the cards, but you can't even work towards it. But you can make more money, invest properly, figure out how to start a secondary business on the side, cut back on the lifestyle, cut back on the subscriptions that you have, like Netflix and Disney and Hulu and all these other kind of things that you have, and the sports channel. Like, get rid of all that stuff. Look at your expenditures. I was talking with Kip on this Wednesday's podcast, and I said, how many cars do you have? And I think he said, did he say 4? He might've said even 6. And we have 5 vehicles. Okay, like, do we need that? No. Was it nice? Yes, we've earned it and we paid for it. It's ours, but we don't need that. And if we had to make sacrifices, then that's what we would do. Those are the sacrifices that we would make. The other thing is there's a lot more co-ops and group type settings popping up. And you really ought to be aware of that, because when I say homeschool, yes, I'm talking about homeschool, but I'm also talking about alternate education, right? And one of those opportunities might be that you have a co-op home education center in your community. And I've seen parents get together where you as a parent would have the kids for one day a week, and then the other days they're somewhere else. And so maybe you don't go from 2 full-time incomes down to 1 only, but you could go from 2, and then the other, your wife or you or whoever, based on your dynamic, could reduce your hours by 20 or 30%. So you're not having to go cold turkey, but you're actually moving in the right direction, getting your kids out of this dangerous public school system and moving into an environment that could be more beneficial for them. And that's not to say it's 100%, because if we're talking about co-op and other families, like, yes, I want to be really clear about this. The pros and the cons is that you need to make sure you vet those people, because you could run into the exact same problem you're running into at the school district, that you have an unvetted person teaching your children who knows what. And maybe even, unfortunately, I know this happens, obviously, inappropriate behavior, sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. So those things need to be vetted, of course. But I think you understand the point. Now, if there's other reasons that you're like, well, it doesn't work because of this, but some kids don't have these opportunities, I get it. Again, I'm talking about you. And I'm willing to have this debate. It was amazing to me how so many people, it seems like, lost their minds in the post that I made on, was it Tuesday? No, I think it was on Monday. People just, their minds exploded. Their minds melted. Like, all reason and logic and rationale just went out the window. I can't do that, but I can have a discussion, a rational discussion about this. And we should be talking about this. But these are all myths that just are not rooted or based in reality. Number one is that you're not qualified. That's a myth. You are uniquely qualified, maybe even more so in a lot of ways. Oh, but Ryan, not everybody is. Again, I'm not talking about everybody. I'm talking about you. And you are qualified. And if you don't feel like you are, you can be. That's the beauty too, is you can get qualified, not by some credential and going through college, but by picking up the skills and the tools and the things that you need in order to be successful at this. Second myth, that your children won't be socialized, as if the government school system has the corner on the market when it comes to socialization and group activities for children. Clearly that isn't the case. I explained probably 5 or 6 things that my children do, and they have plenty of social interaction. Number 3 is they won't be exposed to new ideas. Again, as if public school space is the only place in which new ideas are discussed. You can introduce them to new ideas. You can give them new information. You can have them read different books or listen to different like they're going to be exposed to new information. It's just going to be in a controlled environment so you can help them understand what is real, what is not, what is truth, what is lie, what is right, what is wrong, what's going to serve them, what's going to hinder them. And it's all filtered through you, where it should be, the parent. That's your responsibility. And then the last one is, I can't do it because of time constraints and money. That actually, there's a lot more legitimacy to that one than the rest of them. And so I understand, because I've actually been there in my life where having my wife at home and not having an income outside of the house was actually very, very challenging for us. Like, we struggled to make bills. We struggled to put any money away. We struggled with food. We lived off of our food storage for a time because the income wasn't coming in. So we had to make sacrifices and we had to do things differently. And I had to figure out a way to make more money. And I started a different business. And then I had 2 businesses. Maybe even your wife, can do something out of the house. That's an option. Instead of going to the workforce 40 hours a week, she could be at home. Who knows? Maybe there's even an option with her current employment. This is one of the beautiful things about COVID, is that it taught a lot of people and showed them that maybe they don't actually need to be in the office. My mother did this, actually. She was going into the hospital and she does coding for the hospital for insurance claims and benefits. And she approached them and said, hey, I'm doing this here. Can I just do this at my office? It's going to cost you less money. It's going to take me less time to commute. I'll be able to dedicate more time to the business. They're like, yeah, sure. And so she created that opportunity because she asked. She just asked for it. You might be able to do that, or your wife might be able to do that. And now you're home. So you put in your work and you do what you say you're going to do with your employer, but then you're home and you're available to be able to teach. And by the way, schooling at homeschool, it doesn't take 7, 8, 9 hours per day. It takes 2 or 3 hours a day because it's catered. It's customized. It's specific. It's sniper-like. There isn't a whole lot of distractions. There's no assemblies and transferring from class to class and waiting for this person because they don't get it. Like, it's hyper-focused, which means that it can be much more efficient. Anyways, I know it's sad. I guess I am. I'm trying to convince you that this is a viable option. I was going to say I'm not trying to convince you. No, I am. I'm trying to convince you that this is a viable option. That if you've ever considered it, if you haven't considered it, cool, no problem, do your thing. But if you've ever considered it, don't let people tell you that this is the way it is. These myths are myths for a reason, and I busted them wide open today. And if you're curious about more of this, keep looking into it. Lots of resources out there, lots of great curriculums. I'll answer any questions you have, because I think more and more parents need to do this with and for their children. All right, guys, there you go. Homeschooling myths busted. We'll be back next week. Until then, go out there, take action, and become the man you are meant to be.